right, so welcome back everyone to Q&A newer functionality 2. All right, let's get going on our first tip. So again, over the years, we've trained a lot of administrators who have said, I didn't realize I could do that, as we go through some of our training tips and tricks. So that's what this series is for. It's a short half-hour presentation to give you some potentially new functionality that you weren't aware of that can make your life a little bit more efficient and easier when you're administering your QReserve site. So today's slide deck is on newer functionality 2. Again, these are newer features that we've brought out in the last few months that you might not have realized that we had. So number 1, let's start with hiding the project field. And I'll show you in our lab demo an example of this so you can see what it looks like. But you may have noticed when you're creating a reservation on some of your resources, or any of them if you have this field toggled on, that it asks you if you want to add the project number or add this reservation to a project in the reservation window. You may not use projects at your organization, or maybe you don't use them with that particular resource all the time. And so it's just another field that's cluttering up the view that you have to skip over all the time, or maybe you're getting questions about it because people are confused and they don't understand what it's for. So we have actually enabled the ability to toggle that off now, which makes it a little bit cleaner and less confusing. We also made this available on a resource by resource basis. So you can turn it off on some resources and turn it on others. So it's not applied universally across your site. So let's swap over into our lab demo, and I'll show you an example of what this looks like. Let's share this tab. So here's our trusty lab demo site. And I'm going to go, let's just look at one of our resources here, and we'll reserve, or pretend we're going to reserve this, and I'll show you what that project field looks like. So this is what we're talking about. So once we've opened up our reservation window, as we're scrolling down, you'll see here is this project field. Now, it's not mandatory. People don't have to use it, but it is there taking up space. So that's the field that we're talking about right now. So if we want to change that and toggle it off, what we'll do is we'll go into our administration and into resources. We're going to select the resource in question. Find that here. So this is the one we were looking at. Okay, and then we're going to go into reservations and scroll down to fields in our menu. And here is the field here, show project field on reservations. You'll see that it's at yes. The default is yes. So we're just going to click on that and turn it to no. And that project field will be gone. So if we go back into our main area and we take a look at our reservation here, and you'll see that that project field is now removed from the reservation window. So it just cleans it up a little bit. Now I'm going to go back in because there are a few other things that you might have noticed that are in that fields submenu that are not necessarily new, but they're there. So I'm going to show you about them while we're in there. So let's go back into reservations and fields. Okay, so we have a few other things here. I'm going to put that project field back on to where it was, but you'll also see in this section, we can also hide or enable the purpose field on our reservations, and whether or not the purpose is required or not. We can hide or enable the note field, that project field we just looked at, the account number field, and the name override field on reservations. So there's a lot of things in there. These aren't new additions, but you might not have realized they were there because they're sort of hidden in this section. So that's where you can find that, and that can help you clean up that interface for your users if those are fields that you aren't using or aren't using very often. Again, all of these can be done on a resource by resource basis. And you can also use our handy multi-edit feature to change that as well. Those of you who have been in our Q&A webinars before are familiar with our multi-edit, but just in case you're new, the multi-edit is at the top of the screen here. And when you choose the multi-edit, it allows you to change the same field to the same attribute for multiple resources at once. So you can choose all of your resources or some of your resources, choose those, select your field. You'll see here, I'm going to show purpose field. That's the one that we just looked at. And then indicate what you want that value to now be. For example, if I want to shut it off on multiple resources, I make the value no, and then I apply the changes. So nice and easy. And that applies to the other fields that we looked at as well. All right, so there's our first tip. Let's take a look at something else. So our next one is toggling modules on or off. In QReserve, a module is if you're in your administration tab and you see the different options that you have in your left side menu, those are your modules. So for example, kiosks or projects or invoicing, those are all modules in QReserve, and that's what we call them. But did you know that you have the ability now to toggle modules on or off in your site to make them available or unavailable to your other administrators? Why would you want to do this? Again, making your interface a little bit cleaner. If there are certain modules that you don't ever use and you want to make it a bit easier to sort of navigate around the site, or you don't want to confuse anybody if you've got newer administrators, you can toggle these on or off. You can also bring them back on at any point in time. Just one note that I wanted to point out is if you are on one of our older legacy plans, so some of our customers who have been with us for many years may be on an older plan, this functionality may not work or may not be available to you. If that's the case and you would like this to function, just contact us and we'd be happy to get that changed for you. But those of you who are on our current plans, you'll be able to see these. So it's very easy to do. What you'll want to do is go to your administration tab and into the site settings section. You'll scroll down to modules and you'll be able to see the modules that are available for your site. They're all listed down the page with toggles on each one. Simply toggle it on or off to make it available or unavailable. So let's go back to our demo site and we can take a look at what that looks like. So we're in our demo site here. We're going to click on administration and site settings, down to modules. And here's what it looks like. So you'll see here we have our different modules listed. And we have the ability to turn them on or off one at a time by the toggles on the right-hand side here. So for example, some of our customers don't use the invoicing module at all. They don't invoice anything through QUniversity. So if that's the case, you can simply toggle that off, give it a moment. You might need to refresh your site and it will update and you'll see in the left-hand side menu, the invoices module will be removed. So you can see here, I no longer have the invoices module listed. Okay. To turn that back on, I'm just going to go right back to the same place, site settings, modules, and then I'm going to turn on the invoicing and quote module. Just going to give it a moment here to update. And there you go. It comes back on. So again, it's just a way to make your interface a little bit cleaner. Okay, on to our next tip. Actually, just give me a moment. I think we might have had a guest coming in. We're good. Okay, on to our next tip. And this is a great newer feature that we've put in that you, again, may not have noticed yet. And it really opens up a lot of granularity into user permissions and what people are allowed to do in your site. So originally we had 3 user roles. We had user, moderator, administrator. And so, you know, your administrator has, of course, full access to everything in your site. Moderators, almost everything in the site except for site settings. And your users, of course, had much more restricted access to what they could do in your site. And through customer feedback, we came to realize that there were some sort of gray areas and some permissions that were maybe needed for users, but you didn't want your users to have full administrative privileges, but you needed them to be able to do certain things. And so that's why we've developed our new user permissions. So again, in the administration, you'll go into users, just choose the user whose permissions you want to update. And in the user profile there, you'll have a permissions tab. So you're going to click on that and scroll down, and you'll see we have an assigned roles section. You can select the role that you want to add to that user. We have a list of choices, and just click add role. It will add that onto that user. And then if there are any other restrictions on top of that, then you'll see an additional editor to add or subtract. And I'll show you an example so we can look at that. That just lets you dig down into even further granularity into that user permission. You can add multiple new user permissions to the same user, so they're not restricted to just one of these roles. So you can add as many as you need to. And then similarly, if you need to remove any of those additional roles from the user, it's very easy. You just go back into that same section and click the delete button to remove that role. So we have a whole documented page on our knowledge base, and I've linked that in the slide deck, which I'll send out later to everybody, so you'll have that. And you can read up more on that, but we'll look at an example here as well. So let's go and back to our demo site. Okay, so we're going to go into administration, users, and I'll just pick a user here. So here I've got, this happens to be a bot, that's why it looks a little different, but it works the same way. We're going to go into our permissions tab. So you'll see that this is a user. And I'm going to look into assigned roles. Unfortunately, it's not going to show you the drop down here, but let me just click on one so you can see. So I have, for example, I'm going to add the role of live maps editor to this user. I'm just going to click add role, and you'll see permissions are now granted. What it does is it allows them to create and manage live maps, and there's no further restrictions. So that's an easy one. If you give this person that permission, they can create and manage live maps, and you can take it away if you need to. So that's a nice, easy one that can be done. Now, the rest of this user's permissions still remain at the user level, so they won't be able to do anything else except this. But we can add another role. Let's say, for example, let's say this is a reservation forcer. We'll add that role in. So now our user is also a reservation forcer. But you'll see here that I have the ability to add further restrictions onto that user permission. So let's open that up, and you'll see here that I have more choices, quite a few more choices. So what I can do is further add on restrictions. So for example, this person, my user now, maybe I only want them to be a reservation forcer for reservations that are created by certain users. So maybe you have a supervisor and you only want them to be able to force reservations for users in their group. So I could add those particular users, or a user group, or reserved for a group, or for only certain resources, or only resource tags. So for example, maybe I have a group of microscopes and I want the person to be able to force reservations for microscopes. So anything that I've tagged microscope, they now have that restriction. So you can see how you have the ability to get much more granular with your permissions using this feature here. Let's say this user's role has changed and now I no longer want to have that permission granted to this person. So I just see here on the left-hand side, I have a little delete button, and I just remove it, and I can remove each role. So now I can continue to leave this user as maybe a live maps editor, but I no longer want them to be a reservation forcer. So it's as easy as that to add newer permissions onto specific users. And again, it's a user by user basis, so you can change it for individual users, and administrators can remove or add those privileges at any time. There's lots of different user permissions in there, so it's worth taking a look if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that functionality yet. Okay, and we're going to look at our last tip of the day, which is reservation presets. So again, this is a new functionality that we've brought. And what this allows you to do is create templates for users to book multiple resources together with one click and reserving it at once, like a kit or a suite of instruments. So you may have resources that are used along with each other frequently, And people currently, if you don't have this set up, they would have to book the instrument and then add resource, add resource, add resource. So it does take a little bit more time for those people to add it on. And you may have these, again, that they're used frequently together. So it would be easier if it was bundled together and they could just make one reservation and it would book all of the items at the same time. And so that's what reservation presets do. So you'll go into your administration and resources, and now we're going to actually set up a new resource. So adding the resource, and we have the type as reservation preset. So that's an option in the menu that you can choose. You'll give it a name, and then you'll click add resource and edit. And this is where you'll now be able to configure that reservation preset. So we have the tab reservation preset, create preset. You'll click on there and then add the resources that you'd like to include in that preset and save your template. And then that acts just like a regular resource in terms of a resource profile. So you can still include the photos, the descriptions, disclaimers, just like you do with any of your other resources that you have right now. Just again, a bundling of resources. So we do again have a resource preset documentation, which is available in our knowledge base so that you can read up some more. This will be linked on the slide deck when I send that to you. But let's do an example as well live. So we'll take a look and see what one looks like. So we're going to go into our demo. Oops, let me share this tab. Got our tab here. We're going to go into administration and resources. And we're going to click on our add resource up here at the top right. And now in the type of resource, I have the ability now to to choose reservation preset. So that's one I'm going to choose. And I'm going to call it something. Let's call it fluorescent imaging kit. And you can choose the calendar type. Again, reservation presets is what I want. So I'm going to add that resource and edit. And here I am in my resource or my reservation preset tab, and I'm going to create the preset. So I'm going to choose what resources I want to add to this. So let's we're going to put in a microscope, and then I'm going to put in fluorescent stain, and I'm going to put in some glass slides. Okay, so here's my 3 things. You'll see I can also indicate the default duration. Now users can change these as well as quantities of items once they get into the booking itself, but this is just setting up your, again, template. So this is the default that you want to show up in that reservation preset, but don't worry, there's still the flexibility to change. So let's create that. Okay, so you'll see here I've got my various resources. These resources were already created before. I'm just adding them into this preset. So you need to have made sure that you've created those resources individually ahead of time. Okay, so let's go back. Actually, one sec. I'm going to put it in my, we'll find out what category it went into. I didn't classify it. So let's see where it ended up showing up. Here we go. So here's my fluorescent imaging kit. So as a user, when they come to look at this, you can add a display category again if you like, but it gives them a little summary below the title as to what is included in this imaging kit, and they can go ahead and reserve it. So let's say I'm going to make a reservation. You'll see it defaults automatically to an hour, but your users can change that as they need to. They can change the date, again, just like a regular reservation. So here's our resources. So we've got 1 slot. Makes sense. I've got an hour. I've got my stain. You'll see I can change the quantity if I need to add more stain or slides. Maybe I need 10 slides, not just 1. And you'll also see you've got subtotals for each of your items if you have rates in your site. And in here, I have rates for each individual item. So it's going to adjust as I change the quantities here. I need an account number in this particular one. So I'll just put an account number and save. And we're done. So I've now made a reservation on my preset in 1 click. So nice and easy to do that. I encourage everybody to give it a try if you have items that are commonly booked together. Yes, is there a question?
Yeah, I was just for reservation presets,
Hmm.
the settings, because you have to make them individually first and then add them into the preset.
Correct.
Does the settings for the preset override the settings for the individual items, or
So can you give me an example of which type of setting you're thinking of?
so like you make the fluorescent or like the glass slides, for example, they might have their own booking, um, like, oh, it can be booked for an hour minimum or up to 2 hour, whatever kind of
I
setting
see.
you want. And then, but the preset says, oh, the minimum is actually 3 hours. Does
Gotcha.
that overwrite?
Yeah, so when you're doing your preset, there's the rule. Actually, that's a good question. I didn't say I had this one just set up as a default time. I didn't put a like a rule on it like that. Your rules for your reservation or your resources should apply.
Okay.
That is an excellent question. I'm going to check in with that because it is, like I said, it's a newer feature. I'm sure we have an answer, but I didn't practice that with my preset. So we're going to look into it. So we want to know, do the rules for the preset override the individual rules for each resource?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to make a note of that. And when I send out my follow-up email to everybody on the webinar today with the slide deck, I'll make sure I include the answer to that question as well. Nikki, I'm assuming you signed up for it, so I should have your email, right?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Just want to make sure you get that answer.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. That's a great question. Because yes, you can act, like I said, you can add those restrictions just like you would with your other resources. So it makes sense that at some point you might end up with a conflict in your rules. Okay, do we have any other questions about any of the features and functionality that we talked about in today's session? Hopefully it was easy to follow and gave you some interesting things to try out on your own sites and making your life a little easier. I'll just double check the chat. Okay, I don't see anything in here. So thank you everybody for attending another one of our Q&A webinars. Again, we'll have the recording up in the next few days on our website, and I will send out the slide deck as well as a certificate request for those of you who would like to request a certificate of attendance for continuing education hours or just to track your training. I'll have that available as well, and I'll send that out to you shortly after the webinar if you do require one. Thanks, everyone.